You're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I am Kendall Brian Hunter, and I am author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. Try not to get the glare on it. It's a commentary on the book of Job in the Old Testament. If you're going through some trials, if you're being affected by the government shutdown right now, take a look at the book. Hopefully you'll find both peace and also answers to any of the questions you have about problems and difficulties in life. This time of the year, during Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, it can be a traumatic time for some people, and hopefully my book will guide you through some of the grief and sorrow you may be experiencing and relying upon the teachings of the Bible. So this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I do talk about the Come Follow Me lessons. I try and get it in as quickly as possible. It's funny, 4 years ago I was trying to get this under 5 minutes. Now we're consistently getting about a half an hour. Sometimes I have to supersize it. So today's theme is You, Savior on Mount Zion. And we're covering sections 125 to 129. This is interesting. I was checking the calendar. I think I have, after I film this, there'll be 8 more sessions of these where I film these, and then we'll be done. My intention is, after having cycled through for 4 years and take a look how bad things were when I started out, but that's a little bit part of life, is that you start making tweaking micro adjustments over time, and things change subtly, and they improve. President Oaks, our prophet, gave 2 talks in General Conference. One is called Small and Simple Things, and the second one's called Where Will It Lead? You put the 2 talks together, you make these small and simple changes, and where will these small and simple changes take you? Did you just have an aha moment where you put those 2 talks together? So that's not what I want to talk about. I have another podcast where I do a little bit more political and social commentary. It's basically where I talk about whatever I want to talk about, but this is focusing on Come Follow Me. So let's start with section 125 about colonizing. So this talks about the colony next to Nauvoo. First of all, it talks about the people. Before you start talking about the locale, talk about the people. It uses this expression, people essaying to be saints. Now, essaying means striving to be saints. And judging from what I'm hearing in General Conference, there's people struggling with perfectionism. Toxic perfectionism is like, well, I'm not sure if I'm forgiven, and I keep making the same mistakes over and over again. I don't feel like I'm living up. There's benefit for the process. Once again, President Oaks talks. I didn't intend this, but it just came up. Small and simple things, the small and simple things you do to improve yourself, not big, hairy, audacious goals, wildly audacious goals, but small and simple things over time. Where will these lead? That's how you do it. Read section 93 about how you move from grace to grace. Forget people's interpretations of the book of Romans. Focus on what was revealed in our dispensation. People essaying, people striving to be saints. Now, they have, the Lord calls a colony Zarahemla, and it's interesting. There's a line of reasoning that this is actually the Zarahemla in the Book of Mormon, so you get a North American setting for the Book of Mormon. I'm agnostic on this. I don't think we have enough information. We have some clues that you can pick through. Apparently it had to be a hot area because the Lamanites went around not quite in the buff. They'd have shaved heads, and that's something you do in a hot area just to keep things tan. Not keep things tan, but keep your body under control, body temperature under control. My idea is that this may be recycling the name, because Revelation doesn't say this is the ancient city. It's just to call it this. It doesn't say this is the ancient city, and so there's a gap of logic there, non sequitur. My understanding, this would have been reused, like the name Manti in the Book of Mormon, the city of Manti in Utah, or Antioch in Pittsburgh, in the East Bay of San Francisco East Bay in California. Yeah, there's a city called Pittsburgh, a city called Antioch, a city called Dublin. We're just recycling the names. Philadelphia, that's also a recycled name. This also talks about Nashville. No, there wasn't a Nephite city named Nashville, this pre-existing city. You see, there's multiple gathering places, multiple lands of inheritance. That's First Nephi 22:12. Lands, in the plural, lands of inheritance. Section 101, verse 21. What happened during Brigham Young's era, Joseph and Brigham Young's era? We had to get saints from Europe and all over the world and have them come and concentrate in Utah. That is no longer the case. President Harold B. Lee, it's in April 1973, really emphasized, and that's when it took. I mean, earlier prophets talked about that. We need people to develop, establish Zion in other areas in Cape Verde and Portugal and Russia and China. We need people to stay put and build up the city countries there and not come to America. Like I said, it's 1973. That's where the prophet Harold B. Lee just said, "Okay, we're getting serious about this." Of course, people ignore it, and these are people who live prosperous lives, but they're letting their country down. Now, of course, I can't judge in every situation. There may be some reasons for that, but the general pattern of the council is to, stay put. You don't come to Utah. We're out here to make saints, not make Americans out of people. Section 126, Brigham Young and the doctrine of getting released. Remember these manuals? Well, these are some of the greatest books the church has ever published. You go online. I have a question. Are you reading? Or is it just easier to say that you have a question, be agnostic, and then kind of carry on? What are you willing to do to get an answer to your question? But I'm getting off topic again. Section 126. Some sisters are church calling widows with their husbands, de facto widows, the wives of the bishopric. In our ward, it's nice to see we have the first counselor is a young man with 2 daughters, and the second counselor's wife. They're more of an older couple, empty nesters, and they're sitting together to help manage the children. That is wonderful. We have an issue of leaders neglecting their families. Section 93 talks about that. Okay, the first presidency and the presiding bishopric or presiding bishop get taken to the tool shed over neglecting their families. Something Neal A. Maxwell said. Neal A. Maxwell interviewed Joseph Fielding Smith. This is product placement. Joseph Fielding Smith, Neal A. Maxwell, future member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, interviewed Joseph Fielding Smith, and he asked Joseph Fielding Smith this question: "Your father, Joseph F. Smith, 6th president of the church, was gone a lot during your childhood. Did you resent that?" This is from his biography written by Bruce Hafen. Neal expected him to say no, that his father was doing the Lord's work. Instead, Elder Smith said, "Yes, it was very hard, but I'd go see my aunt and after school, and she would talk to me about the prophet Joseph Smith." Remember that Joseph Fielding Smith is the grandnephew of Hiram Smith. So Hiram Smith, or Joseph Smith. So Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith's son is Joseph F. Smith, and Joseph F. Smith's son is Joseph Fielding Smith. So his family is part of it. And it's hard as when your dad's a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, polygamy persecutions going on. It was hard. Let's not sugarcoat that. Let's not be dishonest about that. So releases. There's a tendency, for example, in the area I've lived in for the past few decades, around a university, there's just a lot of turnover. Also, our ward is shrinking a bit. That is saying that your ward has a certain set of boundaries, and houses are being displaced. People who aren't showing up to our ward or going to other wards are not members. So there's a strategy to dogpile callings on people. Because the turnover, get people to stay put, let's give them 2 or 3 callings. Dogpiling callings is against church policy, 30.1.1. Regardless if it was or wasn't against church policy, it's just bad judgment, it's foolishness. The law of diminishing returns. The more work you pile upon someone, the less effective they become. People staying up late and are not going to the gym, they just do a half-bake with each calling because it gets stretched too thin. It's a foolish decision, a fool's paradise. King Benjamin said you do things in wisdom, order, you're diligent. In section 10, do things according to the strength and means, but not run people into the ground. I kind of wonder if some of the people who are less active are people who've just been run into the ground into the church. People just given too many callings, and they had to neglect their family to do the church stuff, honoring their covenants to the church by dishonoring their covenants to their family. And because they're being overloaded, they had to make that obscene choice. Elder Duncan, I got a little quick. Elder Duncan in the April 2025 conference said, while the easier path may be to give faithful members a second calling, the more excellent way is to invite the unlikely to serve and let them learn and grow. So what the problem is that you need to nurture future talent. So you have the normal catch-22. You can't get a job until you have experience. You can't get experience unless you have a job. At some point, you have to break the catch-22 by giving someone inexperienced a calling. And people are just being filthy pigs about this by overloading and overworking people and not nurturing new talent. So, yeah, get a testimony of getting releases. You're called by inspiration. You're released by inspiration. I remember... we had a brother who was a member of the stake presidency and was called to the General Sunday School Board and didn't want to get released, wanted to do both callings. And at some point, sanity had to step in. It's like, no, you can't do both callings. Let go, Gollum. You're defining your value by the callings you hold instead of your relationship to Christ. That is point 2. Point 3. We're going through this a little bit quickly, and that's okay. This is get to the point. Point 3. Redeeming the Dead, sections 127 and 128. 127. This is a letter that shades into a revelation, and so you get this question. This is a letter, but then it just starts quoting Revelation, and it's hard to decide, okay, is this a full-blown revelation spoken in a prophetic voice, or is this a letter? I'm having the same problem with the book of Isaiah, because it's hard to pick out, okay, when's Isaiah speaking and when is he recording the first-person words of the Lord? But this letter says, in some cases, it just doesn't matter. It's all truth, whether it's first-person the Lord or Isaiah talking. So section 127, it's a letter, and it talks about the need for a recorder. Now, the expression, it's funny, for the temple, we call them recorders instead of clerks. The expression recorder comes back from parliamentary procedure. What we'd call a clerk, they used a recorder, and the church just adopted that term. And this section is why they choose it, why they call it that. The record, it says, this is really quick, it says the record of the ordinance binds the ordinance, that you need to have someone there recording this. This gets into an area of, I've been a clerk twice, and people just don't, some people, you know the word I'm not saying, you know exactly the office of the church that I'm not mentioning, just so you don't get mad at me for being a critic, but certain people just don't think it's important to record things, be it a financial clerk or membership clerk. Same thing with missionaries of the area book. There's a Sister Keel. If you're watching this, Sister Keel, I remember you and your purple pen, because I followed you certain areas, and I go to the area book, and I knew you kept notes because I saw your purple pen in the area book. And you have to do a little kickback to make sure, okay, we have to take time to work on the area book as missionaries. You have to record these ordinances and get these ordinance certificates out. And it comes from, certain bishops. There I let the word slip out that I was trying not to say. Certain individuals want the words to be focusing on activities and socializing, and you have to keep these records. King Benjamin talks about it. Remember, after King Benjamin, he just didn't go home in a euphoria. They took names. Talks about in the Book of Mormon about keeping records. Actually, the Book of Moroni about keeping records. Section 128 expands upon this. So the message he gave, he needed to give some more clarification. Just because the Lord said one thing does not prohibit him from saying another thing. And if the church makes a statement and they make a subsequent statement clarifying it, it's okay. It happens in this section. The church can express things and give more clarification, and it's nothing wrong. It's nothing devious. It's not backpedaling. It's just we need more clarification. The first step is to put the item on the table to make it a thing. The second thing is, okay, let's expand it and clarify things. So this one talks about how you have a temple recorder, but you have a recorder for each ward. Now it's interesting. We don't do that anymore. We just have the temples have the recorder, and we keep track of the stuff. But each ward does not have a recorder anymore. The doctrine of this. Now it's interesting how Joseph Smith establishes a doctrine. He doesn't say, do it because I say so. He doesn't say, hey, this would be a nifty idea. He starts quoting doctrine, and he teaches doctrine. Revelation 20:12. That in the last day, there's two books. One's the book of life, and then one's the records of the church. You are saved by grace, but you are judged by your works. Don't confuse those. People get confused. Well, if I'm saved by grace, I don't have to do my home teaching. Well, we keep a record of ministering visits. So you're saved by grace, but you're judged by your works. The record is part of the binding power. You have the ordinance, but you need to have the record to make it valid. You really think about that. So certain members of the church who kind of rush things, the secretaries and the clerks, make sure they have time to record stuff. That's very important. Matthew 16, 18, 19. Whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Loose on health is loosed on earth is loosed in heaven, referring to Peter. Now, I had a stake president who was a convert, and he said this, and allow people sometimes to make mistakes. My podcasts are full of them. Sometimes I'll have to backtrack on things, but he referred to Peter as the rock upon which the church would be built. That's good papal doctrine, bad church doctrine. It's interesting that as you read this, they weren't speaking English. The New Testament, we have it recorded in Greek. We have Petro, Petra. Petro is Peter. Petra means a little rock. A stone, also a seer. The Joseph Smith translation clarifies. They're speaking Aramaic. Now, I don't know Aramaic, so I don't know how it sounds in Aramaic. French is a little bit funnier. Thou art Pierre, and upon this Pierre I'll build my church. They weren't speaking French. Portuguese, Pedro, Pedra. Same thing with Spanish. I should have built up to the French one. I'll have to remember it next time when I'm telling the joke. But this had nothing to do with the wordplay. There's an ordinance involved. Of course, you're saved by the rock of your Redeemer. But Joseph Smith and the Joseph Smith Manual, Chapter 16, page 195 of this manual, explain that the rock is the rock of revelation. Now you have two expressions here, the keys of the kingdom and the gates of hell. Now you think about that. You use keys to unlock the gates of heaven, you unlock the gates of hell. And it's interesting, the expression, the gates of hell will not prevail upon them. So you have the gates of heaven where you want to get to. But when you die, you go to this the realm of the dead. And this is talking about the gates of hell will not prevail, will not keep you inside the gates, but this will unlock the gates of hell and get you into the gates of heaven. So this is actually about work for the dead. When we talk about the sealing power, because that's what the sealing power involves, is we do the sealing power for and we sometimes think it's all about work for the dead, but no, it refers to work for the living too, all ordinances, because there's no distinction between the living and the dead. But you have these priesthood keys that can open up the gates of hell, set people free, because we do these ordinances which bind them. So the gates of hell will have no power over people. This also talks about the baptismal fonts being in a place that reminds us of the dead. That's why they're in the basements or underground in the temple. 1 Corinthians 15, 46, 47, 48. That's the chapter's about the resurrection, once again dealing with dead people. See the Joseph Smith translation for clarification. And there's a parallel. What's on earth is earthly, what's heavenly, earthly or earthy. But there's a parallel. It's the same thing with the ordinances. We have to do these ordinances on earth to make a parallel in heaven. You have the obvious one, 1 Corinthians 15, 29. And it's always kind of fun when you get another translation of the Bible, read that about baptism for the dead. I remember a number of years ago, I was talking to a gal who was Mennonite, and I had my tablet, and she had her paper scriptures. And so I remember I was sitting there and just got these big image of big block letters, 1 Corinthians 15, 29, just right in my mind. So we read this verse together, and she had never read this verse. I said, yeah, it's right in your Bible, baptism for the dead. And people trying to explain it away with slick and slippery footnotes. Then the section quotes Malachi 5 and 6 about Elijah, the binding, the welding link. We've taught lessons about that. I hope we understand it. That's not something you can get from C.S. Lewis or Martin Luther. We love the work that they did. We support the work that these other churches do. Church, mosques, synagogues, we're supportive of them, but we need to be clear on Elijah and our understanding of Elijah. Then it closes with a nice rhapsody, the Voice of Gladness rhapsodies. We're just not linking families together, we're linking dispensations. So we have eras and epochs. This is the space age, the computer age, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age. Then we focus a time of prophetic dispensations. Adam, Enoch, Noah, Moses. This is the last dispensation. This section also gives us a slight clue to the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood, that elusive question that we were never able to track down, and no one pinned Oliver Cowdery down. Okay, we need to. When did this happen? You were there. You're the one Joseph Smith has passed on. You were there. We need to know when this happened. You have this allusion to Michael or Adam detecting on the banks of the Susquehanna River, detecting the devil. Now, this may have maybe a little bit going on when Joseph and Oliver Cowdery were baptized. Was this associated with the baptism, or was this another incident? But the devil appeared as an angel of light to Joseph Smith, and he wasn't experienced enough at it, and so he had to have Michael come down. Remember the two opponents, Michael and Lucifer. Michael had to detect him because Joseph Smith just not had the experience to cast the devil out, I imagine. He mentions this angel Raphael. Now, Raphael's in the apocryphal book of the Tobit, T-O-B-I-T. Not mentioned anywhere, but it's mentioned the Apocrypha. So this is our Apocrypha connection, along with section 91. Now, this is fun. This is my favorite book of the Apocrypha. Read chapter 6, and there's a suggestion that marriages were foreordained. So the Apocrypha, T-O-B-I-T, Tobit, not Hobbit, but Tobit, chapter 6. Now, this talks about the premortal council when the morning stars shouted for joy, and then talks about the sons of Levi offering up a record. So, notice how this is mixing the Old Testament and the New Testament. The need for the sons of Levi, the Aaronic priesthood, the baptism and Aaronic priesthood ordinance, offering a record of the ordinances performed. Sorry, my voice is getting a little raspy. I'm doing 2 podcasts back to back. I just do not have the volume. I wouldn't have survived back in the olden days. So that is Work for the Dead. I apologize. I feel like I'm being a little bit superficial, but this is get to the point. I don't want to do a 3-hour podcast on one verse. But those are the sections to study. Colonizations, releases from callings, and Work for the Dead. Let's get to the Christ quotient, the atonement quotient. How do you save the dead, those that died ignorantly? In fact, this morning, I was listening to Erwin Lutzer talk about this on Focus on the Family. And it's a tricky question. He talked a little bit about how people get saved. He used the expression age of accountability, which isn't in the Bible. It's in the Doctrine and Covenants. He talked about, okay, you don't have an age of accountability. You have a level of accountability. Okay, I can sort of go with that. I realize people have different levels of accountability, but it's hardwired into the revelation. Then he talked about people who had died in ignorance. And that's an interesting question. How do you get out of that? You either deny justice, saying you don't need to be baptized, you don't need the gospel, you don't need Christ, just have to have a general sense of the common revelation about God, and God will be merciful enough, or do you deny justice? Or do you deny mercy? Say, no, you're just going to go to heck. You have no hope, just like you read about in the Divine Comedy. We have a solid answer with temple work. So we're logically consistent and also emotionally satisfying. The Roman Catholic does masses for the dead. They talk about that in Maccabees. I remember hearing about on one TV show where sometimes Jews will do a proxy bar mitzvah for a Holocaust victim. Well, that's grateful. You need to keep that alive. Never forget that. We need to understand the work for the dead, the relevance. Gen X, as we mentioned, Gen Y, millennials, and Gen Z and Gen Alpha. We're getting this doctrine out. I feel like there's a trend. We have converts who are really influential members, social media influencers, who haven't quite abandoned the false teachings in the churches they left. And then you have members who want other denominations to like them, so they'll start softballing things and start mimicking things practices in another church, and that's just the wrong direction. We need to be grateful for our distinctions and be bold without overbearing, without being brash, but be confident in the doctrine we have. Second coming quotient. We're building these temples, and I think we're getting ready for the millennium. Because I was sitting there and I was thinking, we're building a lot of temples, but when the second coming happens, there's going to be a societal disruption, infrastructure disruptions, a lot of dead that need to be buried, calamities. So we have to do a lot of rebuilding like they did in the book of 3rd Nephi. But we have these very structurally sound temples. Temple work will not be affected or limited. I mean, so like electricity, but there's workarounds. But we have these temples. We're getting ready for the second coming. All these temples around the world in isolated places like Cape Verde and all these islands in the Pacific. I feel like it's preparing us for the second coming. Joseph Smith said, if the whole church should go with all their might to save their dead, seal their posterity, and gather their living friends, and spend none of their time in behalf of the world, they would hardly get through before night would come. As if we just all stop what we're doing, did temple work, we'd barely get done, is what Joseph Smith was teaching. The second coming's a real thing. Let's do this. Well, where's that? These letters talk about the second coming. Page 21. Don't forget it. We're not left in the dark about the second coming. So this is the Joseph Smith manual. Look at that. The second coming in the millennium. Joseph Smith, not that crackpot, awesome Girk. Read all the patriarchal blessings of my family members. And let's see. Yes. You don't build doctrine about the second coming from patriarchal blessings. 45. You do it from obvious sources, the scriptures, the topical guide. Look again. Brigham Young. The last days. So who do you trust? The Lord Crackpot or Brigham Young? Hey, Joseph F. Smith. So get these books at DI really cheap. What did Joseph F. Smith have to say about things? Look, even the same picture. Preparing for the second coming of Christ. Okay? Prophet, Joseph F. Smith, talking about the second coming. No confusion, no crackpot-osity, no nonsense. Okay, that was 3. Lord's Law of Witnesses. But wait. We have a number 4. Joseph Fielding Smith. Okay, Joseph Fielding Smith. Preparing for the coming of our Lord. Okay. Now, you got 3 Smiths and a Young. You got these 4 books here talking about the second coming. Aren't these sources you can trust? You're not going to worry or say, well, this doesn't quite feel right. Yeah, these are the prophet, keys of the kingdom. These are sources you can trust. Once you're done reading these things, you're just going to go, wow, I can't believe how informed I am. You'll be able to detect and discern crackpot statements in testimony meetings and in church meetings. You'll be able to know the difference if you study these. No confusion. Just study these. No confusion. No saying, I don't know what's going on. You got a roadmap here. You have the book of Revelation, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel talk about the last days. There are safe sources you can trust and have been approved by the church. Because we need to prepare for the second coming, because it is coming. It's about Christ, and Christ, that's the point.